I think there's no such thing as overnight success. While there's absolutely sudden and significant breakthroughs, everything is built off of a foundation of accumulating smaller moments. It's only possible for a musician to suddenly get millions of streams overnight if they have first a foundation of effort and skill. And more often than not, that song that suddenly gets millions of streams in just a couple days is one of many attempts. Despite this, character growth in stories often comes packaged in big moments. And while change can absolutely come through the grandiose, expert writers will utilize the small moments as much as the large. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about how Frieren Beyond Journey's End demonstrates the compounding effect of small moments. So something I want to clarify really quickly is that my claim that overnight success doesn't exist is a bit semantic. There are many artists who go from not being able to support themselves to having a large following in very short amounts of time. What I'm arguing is that sudden and drastic tipping point is the byproduct of consistent effort and development. There's this metaphor from the book Atomic Habits that I really love that exemplifies this. If your goal was to melt an ice cube in a room that was below freezing, and slowly you could increase the temperature, you'd see no drastic change until you broke 32 degrees. And that change would soon be exponential, and before you know it, you'd have a puddle in front of you. But all the work that you did increasing the temperature of the room up to 32 degrees would seem like it was making no tangible impact because you had no external feedback. But tipping points and overnight successes are the exact same. They're just moments with more obvious results from all the effort and attention that has been given so far. I think human beings also change this way. Small things add up over a long period of time. But when writing characters for stories, an incredibly important part of what you're doing is making sure that the audience isn't confused. So when characters change, it needs to feel justified, meaning the audience needs a line of examples as to why the characters made adjustments. If you're not careful, these moments that set up character changes can feel heavy-handed and overt, but even more dangerous, they can be confusing. Writers, generally speaking, are creating a story that serves a specific plotline, and it's not uncommon for them to use characters as tools to fulfill that plotline. This has led to situations where audiences are wary of authors making changes to characters that feel unjustified simply to serve the plot. So there's a fine line between subtle and confusing writing. But bringing back my initial point, I believe small moments add up to drastic change in human beings. So when characters are written with small moments that contribute to change in mind that is also very easy to consume, it creates media that feels incredibly realistic. Or a shorthand explanation is small moments mean a lot to us, but they're hard to capture in stories. But when writers get that right, it's fantastic. Oh yeah, Frieren gets that right. I've seen a lot of videos where people talk about audiences being treated with respect when writers don't assume their audience is stupid. And I think the main correlating argument behind those points is the introduction of non-overt information, like showcasing moments of depth both subtly and cohesively, allowing audiences to discover those things in rewatches or if they're paying attention with a keen eye. I think Frieren is a show that expertly dances around this category, because as I've rewatched this show for this series, sometimes visiting episodes multiple times in a row, I'm shocked at how many times I notice something new for the first time. Even if you limit it to just the first 5 episodes, there's a plethora of examples. Like the fact that at Himmel's funeral, he's buried with blue flowers. Or this little moment where Frieren and Fern are clapping as Eisen lifts a boulder, and then immediately following, he's clapping as she changes grapes from sweet to sour. Which that scene alone has a multitude of different ways it ties into the story. That spell that makes grapes sour is originally introduced with a couple other seemingly meaningless spells that Frieren collects as her hobby, which is related to her immortality and how she finds purpose in her life. In the 5th episode, when she's asked why she's taking risks for a seemingly useless spell, she admits that someone in her past had expressed appreciation for those spells, a small moment that contributed to who she is today. Something that's fascinating is all of these things contribute to the overarching character arcs. But what makes the subtle introduction of all these pieces of information so fascinating is that even if you miss many of them, the cascading effects on the characters still make sense. At first glance, to me, Frieren's characters seemed simplistic and basic. And if you weren't to get very far in the series, I think that's kind of valid criticism. Frieren does this thing where it navigates common tropes in a really eloquent way, sometimes embracing them and at other times subverting them. It's not just a rejection of fantasy standards, which I ended up really liking. which is surprising to me because I may be unfairly critical of tropes in fantasy. But all the remarkable execution in this show ultimately serves, I think, two major purposes. It feels like characters and theme are the foundation of this entire show. Part of the reason I chose Frieren to talk about in this long-running series that I'm making is because there are so many aspects of this show that explore the human condition. There are philosophical and practical questions that are all packaged in a remarkable story. I regularly argue that the main point of art is to emotionally resonate with people, and sometimes that emotional resonance causes us to change. I believe stories have taught me foundational morals and empathy, all packaged in a conveniently entertaining medium. So when I'm talking about the little things that change us, I don't just mean for the characters in Frieren, because I think it can be extended beyond that. A major component of being a human being is about learning and growing. But stories are limited in their ability to showcase reality. It's really important that they feel realistic, but that's such an abstract concept. Making stories is hard. If it were easy, more people would do it at a high level. So when a series like Frieren comes along and not only expresses expert presentation, but also is capable of tapping into, I think, one of the most valuable aspects of art, I want to think and talk about it. Part of the reason I'm making this series and making video essays in general, outside of the professional pursuit, is because I think that the joint experience of consuming remarkable art is awesome. And the themes in this show are worth exploring. Take, for example, the first half of the second episode of Frieren. That story of Fern, Hyder, and Frieren living together for 4 years could be an entire season. I'm glad they didn't make it an entire season, but there's a remarkable depth and story there. In my previous video, I talked about how it was built off of this theme of expressing love. And in each episode, there's all these little micro stories, ones that could exist almost in an episodic way. Except for the fact that they tie directly into overarching themes like Frieren coming to terms with the way she uses her time and builds relationships, or Fern growing up and finding her place in this world alongside someone that is so unique, and even me as a viewer learning from the lessons that the characters have experienced. Because growth often requires resonance, it's hard to adopt something deeply into your life that doesn't make sense to you. And while personal experience is a great way to learn, there are lessons all around us, small moments, if you find the chance to listen. This video is the 7th in a running series where I talk about Frieren Beyond Journey's End. For those who are coming back, thanks for joining me while I talk about this show weekly. The support has been outstanding. Some point soon I'd like to change my upload schedule. For now, these videos are going up at noon on Tuesdays, but I'd like to change it to Fridays. I don't know when that will happen, but just a heads up. We're going to be exploring Frieren's magic system next, which I'm excited about. So if you enjoyed this video, I'll see you next week.